I never thought I'd be the one to cover the night shift, but then again, life doesn't always follow a script. It was supposed to be a regular night. That is, until the call came. Clara's voice trembled on the other end of the phone. I could tell something was wrong. She wasn't her usual calm, collected self. I'd known Clara for years. She was steady, dependable. But now, she sounded different. "Ben," she said, her words rushing out. "I need you to cover the night shift. Milo hasn't answered his phone all day. He didn't leave the store this morning, and I can't get a hold of him." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I brushed it off. Milo was the night shift guy. He was reliable. This had to be a mistake. Maybe his phone was dead or something. Maybe he fell asleep in the back. But Clara's voice didn't sound like someone who was dealing with something that simple. There was a tone to it, something I couldn't place, but it stuck with me. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes, Ben. I'm sure." Her voice cracked, and it was then I realized this wasn't just another routine change. Something felt off, but I didn't know why. Still, I agreed to come in. After all, what else could I do? I needed the hours, and Clara had always been there for me when I needed something. When I arrived, the supermarket was quiet, as expected. It sat on the outskirts of town, tucked into the corner of a sleepy suburban neighborhood. There wasn't much that happened here, nothing too exciting. During the day, it was a place for locals to grab milk, a loaf of bread, a couple of cans of soup. Easy. Peaceful. No surprises. At night, the store was still. It always had been. There were a few night owls who would come in for snacks, maybe some late-night coffee, but mostly, it was just me, the dim buzzing of the fridges, and the occasional car driving by. Routine. Predictable. The kind of job where you could lose yourself in your thoughts without much effort. I assumed this night would be the same. Another 8 hours to get through. I figured I'd be alone most of the time, so I mentally prepared myself for the usual, checking aisles, restocking shelves, mindlessly scanning the occasional customer's items. The hum of the refrigerators would be my only company. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the employee entrance. The supermarket looked the same as it always did. But something was wrong. The door that was supposed to be locked was wide open. A gust of wind pushed it back and forth, the metal creaking against its hinges like a warning. My first thought was that maybe the wind had done it. Maybe the latch had broken. But then I saw her. Juno. She was standing just inside the door, her body trembling as if she'd seen something that chilled her to the core. Her wide eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. It was like she was frozen, unable to speak. "Juno?" I asked, stepping closer. Her body seemed to shudder, and she quickly looked away, as though she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. "Don't go in there," she said, her voice shaking. "You don't understand, this place, it's not what it seems." I paused. The words didn't make sense. It was just a supermarket, right? Nothing more than that. What was she talking about? Why was she acting like this? She wasn't the type to panic. She was one of those people who always kept her cool, no matter what. Seeing her like this unnerved me more than I wanted to admit. She grabbed my arm, pulling me back. Her grip was firm, almost too strong for someone in her state. "Don't stay. Whatever you do, don't stay," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. Her eyes were wild, her face pale. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't know what to make of it. Juno had always been a bit odd, sure, but this was different. I shrugged it off as exhaustion or maybe stress from working the night shift too long. She had been working here for years, and I knew she could handle it. "Juno, you're just tired. Go home," "Get some rest," I said, but she didn't answer. Instead, she ran. Her footsteps echoed through the empty parking lot as she disappeared into the night. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I shook my head and walked inside, telling myself to stop overthinking things. It was just the night shift getting to me. I had a job to do. Inside, the store was exactly as I expected, quiet, still. It felt normal. The aisles were well stocked, the lights overhead buzzing softly. Ella, the day shift clerk, was getting ready to leave. She was wiping down the counter, her tired eyes betraying her exhaustion. She looked relieved to be going home. "Thanks for covering tonight," she said with a small, grateful smile. "It's been a long day." "No problem," I said, trying to ignore the weird feeling settling deep in my chest. I glanced over at the door, still ajar. "Did you see Juno?" I asked. Ella frowned, confused. "Juno? No, I haven't seen her. She hasn't been around." I could feel my stomach tighten. Juno had just been standing in the doorway, and now Ella was acting like she had no idea who I was talking about. I glanced around the store again, but there was no sign of her. "Are you sure?" I pressed, but Ella shook her head. "She left already." "You didn't see her?" I couldn't explain it. I had just seen her. The door was open. She had been standing right there, trembling like she had seen a ghost. "Well, good luck tonight," Ella said, breaking the silence. She grabbed her coat and waved over her shoulder as she left. "It's usually quiet. Don't let it get to you." She was gone, and I was alone. The first few hours passed without incident. There were a couple of customers who wandered in to grab snacks or pick up a forgotten item. The usual routine. I didn't think much of it. It was as though Juno's warning had been a fluke, just her nerves getting the best of her. But then something happened. Around 11:30 p.m., the store fell completely silent. No customers. No cars driving by outside. The sound of the refrigerators filled the air, steady and constant, like the beating of a forgotten drum. That's when I noticed it. At the far end of the store, standing between the aisles, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a customer, someone who had wandered into the wrong aisle. But they didn't move. They were just standing there, perfectly still. I called out to them. "Hello?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty store. No response. I walked toward them, and when I reached the end of the aisle, I stopped. The figure was gone. There was nothing there. I stared down the empty aisle, the light above casting long shadows across the shelves. Nothing. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was just the quiet getting to me. But when I checked the security cameras, the monitor showed nothing. There was no one in the aisle. The shelves were empty, as they should be. That's when I saw it again. The figure had moved. It was now standing much closer, just a few aisles down. The shadow was no longer just a shape at the end of the row. It was close, too close. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at it. My throat tightened. "Who's there?" I asked again, but there was still no answer. I checked the cameras again. Nothing. The aisle was empty. I stepped closer. With every step, the figure seemed to move with me. I wasn't imagining it. I knew I wasn't. I reached the aisle. No one was there. I walked down each aisle slowly, checking every corner. Still nothing. I turned back to the counter and glanced at the clock. It was 12:30 a.m. I wasn't sure what to think anymore. Was this a prank? Had I missed something? Maybe I was just overtired. Then, I remembered Juno's warning. I opened the drawer behind the counter and pulled out the folded piece of paper she had told me to check. It was a list of rules. At first, I laughed. It was ridiculous. Who would write something like this? But as I read the first rule, the laughter stopped. Occasionally, you will see a shadowy figure at the far end of the store. If it is standing still, nod or wave. Do not ignore it. I froze. That's exactly what I had seen. The figure. It had been standing there, waiting for me to do something. I quickly scanned the rest of the list. Rule 2, Rule 3, all of them. Each one more bizarre than the last. Each one more unsettling. But none of them made any sense. They couldn't be real. The clock ticked on. The store felt colder. The rules felt real. And I was the only one here to figure it out. I glanced up. The aisle was empty. Again. But something was wrong. Something had changed. It was around 11:30 when I noticed it. A figure, standing still at the far end of the store. I called out, but there was no reply. I looked at the security monitor, and the aisle was empty. No one was there. I shrugged it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. It was late, after all. But as the minutes passed, that feeling of unease started creeping in. I checked the monitor again. Still nothing. But when I turned my attention back to the store, the figure was there once more. Just standing. Silent. I called out again, hoping for a response, but it didn't move. Not even a flinch. I grabbed the remote and switched to another camera feed, scanning each corner of the store. Nothing. The figure, if it had ever been there, was gone. I couldn't shake it. The feeling gnawed at me. I checked again and again, but the store was empty. It had to be a trick of the light, or I was just tired. But that strange, still presence lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to shake it off. It was just my imagination. I had worked the night shift 100 times before. This was nothing. Yet, there it was again, the feeling. The emptiness, like something was watching, waiting. It wasn't until much later, after the third or fourth check of the security feed, that I realized I was doing something that didn't make sense. I was watching, waiting for something that wasn't there. I knew then that something wasn't right. It was a few hours into my shift when I finally opened the drawer behind the counter, as Juno had instructed. She was my shift partner. She had told me to open it when I got here. I expected to find keys or maybe some spare pens. Instead, I found a folded piece of paper. Rules to survive the night shift, it said. I laughed nervously. It had to be some sort of joke. But something deep inside me told me to read it. Maybe it was the strange tension in the air, or maybe I was just too curious for my own good. Whatever it was, I unfolded the paper and started reading. The first rule was simple enough. If you see a figure in the aisles, wave or nod to acknowledge it, or it won't leave you alone. I frowned. Was that some sort of twisted prank? Who wrote this? I skimmed through the rest. Rule 2, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., aisle 7 becomes different. Don't go near it. I felt a chill. Something about that felt real. Too real. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I should take these rules seriously. Rule 3, if you hear whispers but can't see anyone, they're not just in your head. Acknowledge them or they will make themselves known. I started to wonder what kind of joke this could possibly be. But the tension in the room made me uneasy. I had to keep reading. Rule 4, if a customer enters, count them. There must only be 5 at any given time. If the 6th one enters, you must lock yourself in the back office. The 6th customer is not human. I put the list down. It was ridiculous. Whoever wrote this clearly had too much time on their hands. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The store had a quiet eeriness to it that I had never noticed before. A feeling like eyes were on me. I tried to focus on the work. The rules could wait. But when I went to put the list back, I heard it, a whisper. Soft at first, like a faint murmur just beyond hearing. It sounded like someone was talking, but the words were too soft to make out. I froze, staring at the aisles. Nothing. The store was silent, empty. I glanced at the camera feed. Still nothing. But when I looked back, the mannequins in aisle 7 had shifted. I could have sworn they hadn't been standing there like that a minute ago. They were now facing each other, and their heads slowly tilted towards me. I tried to ignore it. I had to. It was the stress of the night shift. Nothing more. But then I felt it again, cold air, a draft that didn't belong. The air was thick, pressing against me. I glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. The rules. Rule 2. Aisle 7 was different. I didn't know how or why, but I knew the rule was real. I walked slowly toward the back of the store, eyes darting around, looking for anything that would make sense of what was happening. That's when I saw it. A shadow. It was brief, just a flicker in the corner of my eye, but it was there. A figure, standing perfectly still in the shadows. I wanted to scream. To run. But I couldn't move. I glanced at the camera feed again. The figure was gone. Was it just my mind playing tricks? Or had the figure really been there? A cold shiver ran down my spine. I turned around quickly, scanning the aisles, my pulse racing. There were no customers, no signs of life. The store was empty. Except for the mannequins in aisle 7. They were gone. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. But every inch of me screamed to leave, to get out. But I couldn't. Not yet. The next rule caught my eye. If you see something unnatural, like mannequins moving or figures appearing where they shouldn't, you must clean aisle 3 immediately. Do not ignore it. I didn't know what to think. I just stared at the words. The whispering grew louder. I walked cautiously towards aisle 3, my footsteps echoing off the empty shelves. My mind raced. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. And then, as I rounded the corner of aisle 3, I saw it. The figure again. Standing perfectly still, just like before. I called out. No response. The figure didn't move. But something inside me knew. It wouldn't leave until I acknowledged it. I waved. Tentatively at first. But the figure didn't budge. I nodded. And then, for the first time, it turned its head towards me. The silence was unbearable. I took a step back, heart thudding in my chest. I needed to follow the rules. I had no choice. It wasn't until the clock read 4 a.m. that things started to get really strange. I had been checking the aisles for hours now, following every rule, every command on that list. But every time I thought I was safe, something else would happen. A figure would appear in a different aisle. The mannequins would be gone, only to return in an impossible position. I was losing track of time, and with each minute, it seemed like the store was becoming more and more alive. I could feel it. The store was shifting. Twisting. Becoming something I couldn't understand. Then it happened. The 6th customer walked in. I glanced at the clock. 5:50 a.m. There were 5 customers in the store. I knew what the rule said. The 6th one wasn't human. I locked myself in the back office. My heart raced as I pressed my back against the door. The sound of footsteps echoed through the store, closer, closer. I didn't dare look. I couldn't. If I followed the rules, I'd survive. But if I didn't... The clock ticked down. 6 a.m. It was time. I rushed to the back door. With trembling hands, I opened it, ready to escape. But the air outside didn't feel right. It was empty. Black. Endless. I stepped outside, but the ground beneath me was gone. There was nothing. Just darkness. I looked back at the store. It was there, but not there. It was as though the store had shifted, like it was no longer in the same place. I tried to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped. The rules were real. And I would never escape. I took one last glance behind me. The store was right there, but when I looked again, it was gone. And the darkness, it didn't feel like night anymore. I was stuck. Again.